the Patriot deck in general just needs to sit down. It just needs to calm down a notch, you know?
I beat one a minute ago. The first location was cloning vats. So turn 1, Yondu into it, destroyed his onslaught or something like that. Turn 2, another Yondu hit his Patriot. Turn 3, Yondu plus Carnage, and then he just scooped and left. I was like, yeah, I don't blame you.
It feels good when you get the combos to hit right. If you're ready, I'll start.
Yeah, I'm ready, man.
Cool. All right, so then let's do it and welcome on in everybody and say welcome on in, ladies and gentlemen. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as It's Guest Gaming. This is Default Dan, and this is the Snapback podcast where you snap and we snap back. Mr. Default Dan, aka Brit, I'm just taking your Discord name and switching it around. How are you?
Doing well, man. Doing well. Just working on Infinite with the second account again. Just seeing what we can do in the last week, and outside of that, man, just having fun.
Very nice. Very, very nice. I'm still trying. I'm in the 90s, and I'm in the 90s struggle right now. For those who are watching on YouTube, there's a very different appearance going on right now. I have shaved off my hair and my beard. I am in full-on Professor X mode, and that was due to the amazing community over on Twitch. So I just want to say here on the podcast to everyone who supported, thank you so much for making that even happen. And yes, I am extremely cold, but outside of that, we got a couple of things I want to talk to you about today. We just literally, 20 minutes ago, got the OTA announcements for the over-the-air updates for a couple of the cards. We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about our first impressions for Stegron. And then I did a little bit of digging, a little bit of research on the meta right now in April in a way that hasn't necessarily been broken down yet before, because if you're listening to this, we're in the last couple of days of April. So you're in the meta climb and you're trying to get to Infinite like myself, unlike Default Dan, because he's an overachiever. And his MMR is just definitely better than mine. I know that for a fact. But put it all together, we are now in a position where we're trying to get from that 80 to 90 to 100 hump. And yes, we are seeing a lot of people start to condense up there. So I did some filtering. I did some research on a couple of different sites. And I want to talk about the decks that are actually working, because you might be surprised with a couple of them. I know I was when I pulled this up. So let's first start with Stegron, who's now been out a couple of days. And Stegron is a really fun card. And I'm going to stop there and let you take over first, because yes. I'm curious on your thoughts first.
Absolutely. I mean, here's the thing. I'm not a fan of Stegron, but I will go off of what you said. I think he is a fun card. There's a lot of cards in Snap where you can do something, it's cute, the memes are there, and Stegron definitely has that. I mean, Eggs has a short she put up earlier where she got to use Stegron on crap, I can't think of the location, the one that copies it. And essentially she got to punch that card into Fist Tower that was on the other side. Then it made the other Stegron. It punched a card off that location into Fist Tower. You know, I know a lot of people said oh, Stegron plus Kingpin on turn 6. I think it's an okay card. There's definitely other cards that can move cards, right? You've got simple things like Polaris, you've got Magneto, you've got Juggernaut. Right. I think it's just going to come down to how you build your decks, what you really like. And honestly, I'm not sold on a 6,000 token card for Stegron. If he was Series 3, maybe Series 4, depends on what your collection looks like. I would just say as far as where I've got him, he's right in the middle of cards. He's not the worst card. I think his stats are good. He's a fine 4-drop. And again, if you're going against a very particular deck, pretty good to be able to slap him into a different lane. But it's one of those things where it's very dependent upon your matchup and board state. So to me, not a buy for me, but at the same time, a fun card.
Yeah, here's the thing. I've been about Stegron. I've been feeling that he's a good card. I am excited to eventually get him because I did not buy him. As you know, I'm trying to save all my coins, my tokens for May. I want to get every single one of the May drops. They look ridiculously good. And That's going to lead to different kinds of content for me, et cetera, et cetera. Stegron, though, a lot of people went for the move mechanic with Kingpin. And I mean, I even made a Kingpin variation because I want to see how effective it could potentially be. The randomness of that, unfortunately, actually hurts it versus something like an Arrow or a Juggernaut, where it's very specific to the card of the moment. So you could lay out your board state differently, set up 2 lanes for victory. So that way you're only removing it at the end to maintain the board state as it was in the prior turn. So in the Kingpin sense, I didn't see that necessarily happening. Yes, on YouTube, confetti and whistling just randomly happened because I have streamer bots still open. But things happen.
You just froze up, but
I just completely froze up, but things happen. So either way, the other part to this is I also think that people aren't using him right. I think that the best synergy with Stegron may still lie in Kingpin, but not in the way that it's been used. I want to use him desperately in a, hear me out, a hybrid style deck of Kingpin with Cerebro 5 and then mix in at the last second Omega Red. Because the fact that Omega Red in particular needs a lane cleared and you're creating space, what it's actually doing is kind of setting up the pitch, because when you play Omega Red, you're basically declaring that you're going to try to win this lane by 10. Stegron is that great play on the turn 6 to smack out that lane early and say, nope, you can't have this here, and then potentially knock it in there. If you couple on top of that a Cerebro potential variation where you're building up that Stegron, that Omega Red, Polaris, etc., all of these other cards, you have a really, really solid end game built into there. And I haven't seen that done yet. And I think that that might be the very specific deck that he does well in. But again, because he is a very specific deck, I've seen him in general Cerebro 5, I've seen him in general Move, I've seen him in the Kingpin. I made some decks theorizing about it as well to try to sell me on should I spend 6,000 on him. And I just didn't get to 6. I got the justification for 3,000. I can say that I would wait for Series 4. I feel pretty confident in that at the moment because I do think that he is being undervalued specifically because so many creators are waiting for May. We're all waiting for Howard the Duck, Iron Lad, High Evolutionary, and Living Tribunal. That's what we all want. We're all super excited for it. Everyone's saving their collector's tokens. We've been saying it for months. Save for May, save for May, save for May. There's too much good coming out here. We've said it on this podcast. So not a lot of people are getting Stegron. People got Jeff because he was cute and novelty. And he is a good card. I'm happy I spent the money on him. But Stegron, I feel like we are not going to be tapping his true potential until he enters into Series 4. And then once he does, I think we're going to start to see a rise in Stegron more and more as a good tech card for battle mode specifically. He's very specific. Kind of, they're like others.
Yeah, he's definitely one of those cards where, like, you mentioned Cerebro and things like that. Like, if he was a 3, I feel like, and he could be a 3-4, right? Like, I know that messes your Cerebro math, but I'm just saying, like, if he was a 3, I could consider him being a really good turn 6 whatever play. But again, and it's what we had talked about before, right? Like when I fall into this 4-drop on turn 6, I just keep going back and forth of, okay, do I really want him or do I want Shang-Chi at that same spot? And I get that they're two different things, right? Stegron can move an 8-power card out, Shang-Chi whiffs. And so when you look at things like right now, there's a lot of decks like the Patriot deck we saw, top 4 the other day. He specifically made sure nothing in his deck could be Shang-Chi'd in there. So it's definitely one of those things where I can see the value in certain things, but I agree with you. I think it's going to take a little bit of time before we actually see him really break into being played. And we've had a lot of cards do that. You think of things like Stature, you think of Super Skrull, right? A lot of these cards came out, everybody thought they'd be good. They put them in very specific decks, didn't like them. And then they turned around, and now that they're coming into the general population, we're seeing a huge rise of Black Bolt plus Stature. We're seeing a huge rise of Super Skrull coming out everywhere in these decks.
Yeah, buddy. Exactly.
So it could happen. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. It could happen, but it's definitely one of those that right this second, I would just still lean on the Juggernauts, the Arrows, the cards that you mentioned where I know what's happening. And I think that's also because of the Shuri nerf. I think that when Stegron was talked about, was put into this whole world of here's what's next month, is when Shuri was huge, and Stegron looked great against Shuri, because a lot of times Shuri players are putting very specific cards in very specific lanes. And so by, and again, that's why Arrow was so good against him and things like that. But it's like now I think Stegron would have been a great answer, but it's not around anymore. Like 1% of people are playing Shuri now at this point.
It's tremendously
love Shuri.
Yeah, tremendously dropped off. The only time I'm seeing Shuri nowadays is specifically with Nimrod and specifically with a skip turn 5 played on She-Hulks into Taskmaster. I'm still seeing that. It's still risky. It's still very telegraphed. So it does make it more approachable, which was the whole point. It wasn't to kill the deck, but that's a conversation for another cocktail.
Absolutely.
All right. So Stegron, cool card. I say 3,000 tokens. Wait for Series 4. You're on the fence of maybe Series 3, Series 4. Either way, the general definition, it's a fun card. It's just
absolutely.
It's just fun. Moving on to
Speaking of fun cards that we waited to drop series, we got the OTA balances, man, and the first one on the list is Shayna. So, or Shana, or how I got to go back and learn the pronunciation, but this is one of those cards I've literally haven't bought, still sitting there in Series 4 now, waiting to see if I open it and waiting to see if it drops down to Series 3. Curious your thoughts on this. We're going from a 4-2 to a 4-4. Now, remember, OTA balance updates were probably most likely not changing anything in the abilities. Most of these changes we're going to be seeing on the weekly basis are little tweaks, whether it's maybe one less energy, one or two more power, less power, just to see if they can push this card. And again, my guess and my impression of this is 75% of these are going to be trying to boost cards into being playable, right? The 25% of nerfing a card, I think it's going to be if they have a problematic card and they want to see if one little thing will change, they'll try that. But for the most part, I really foresee this as being, can it be playable? And the question is, do you think Shayna is playable now that she'll be a 4-4, where when she comes into play, she gives you a random 1-cost card at each location?
So when it comes to Shanana Unana, I feel like that's all I've ever called her, because I can never get the pronunciation right ever. And even if you tell me in the comments, in the descriptions, in the emails, and the whatever, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It'll always be Shanana Unana. I think it was needed. And the dev's description of saying that the biggest reason was to justify 4 board places being put out there at a certain power average. And when they were doing that, you're taking up 4 board spaces. And for the most part, the average 1-cost card is going to give you 2 power. So you were playing 4 lanes and you were only gaining really 8 power. And that's kind of just like loading. You wouldn't necessarily load up your board with 1-costs unless if you specifically were playing that style of deck. You're playing a Khazar deck. That's it. So, and that's where she's for. She's supposed to be a Khazar synergy. Ta-da. But if you get Killmongered, she's too weak to stand on her own and doesn't have enough benefit otherwise. So that's why they gave her the 2 more power, bringing her up to a 4-4. And I agree with that. I think one of the reasons I've always skipped on looking at her to build a Zoo, Shanna, Dazzler, whatever, Shazzle Dazzle type deck was just because of Killmonger. And I'll revisit it now to see if this 2 power, which is, nice to see a double jump, is going to be enough to make her relevant. But I think they're just trying to get people excited to maybe want to try to use her when she drops into pool 3.
Yeah, it's one of those changes where I honestly think it should have been a 4-5. I think the 4-4 is fine, but because I think my problem is with Killmonger always running around. It doesn't matter what the metas look like. Like there was maybe 2 weeks where Killmonger kind of disappeared for a little bit. But for the most part, it's like Killmonger's always there. So you have to assume 70% of the time, those 1-drops are not going to be there. Or you've already put enough into one slot that 1-drop is hurting you being in that position, right? Because you can get bad ones like Ebony Maw stuck into a lane and then you can't do anything there. So it's definitely one of those things that when they originally looked at these cards, and if we kind of like travel back in time, right? If we travel back in time, we would have had Zabu on 3, Shanna plus Khazar on 4. Like that would have been the play because it was -2, right? So 4-drops are now 2-drops. And that was their expectation of those 3 as a trio because they're all from the same series. They're all working together. But now with the adjustments that we've had, it's, essentially Zabu on 2, Shanna on 3, which now you have, perfect mana, and then Khazar on 4, but you have 1 extra mana. So maybe it's a 1-drop. So you still kind of have that flow of, like you're saying, a 1-drop Khazar Zoo type deck. But I have to assume that you're going to lose a couple of those 1-drops, or you're going to get just not great 1-drops, to where I think 4-5 would make me eyeballer. 4-4 and taking up 3 spots, because remember, even the lane you play are in, now you've used 2 slots,
right?
And 6 power on 2 slots is not good. Like that's what you have to look at too in that lane. So I don't know. I'm a little torn on it. It's a good thing they did it, because I would have I have not played her. I don't have her. Don't plan on really playing her even when I open her. But out of 4-4, maybe 4-5, I would have definitely started playing with some decks.
Yeah, Shanna's going to be one of those cards that I touch again once infinite, and then can mess around without repercussion, which is its own conversation as well. But I think that there is a curve now with the current Zabu. I do think that it's, playing into the lane benefits, like your Dazzler, like your Captain America, things of that nature, to actually have Shanna go to try to be the Zoom play on turn 6. I think that she's the one that you lay down there, so that way there's no negative benefits, and your plan is to fill up the entire board on the final turn, and then all of a sudden the power swing on turn 6. Because I agree, there's definitely some room for improvement when it comes to how the deck works, and I think there is a deck out there, but it's just not a deck that's going to be meta relevant anytime soon. So good upgrade, but not the one we necessarily expected immediately. Lizard, some people talked about, but I personally just didn't see coming, especially in the first round of OTAs. Lizard has gone from being his standard 2/5, which he stays all the way through, his ongoing, because remember, all the OTAs can be numeric changes primarily. So it's not it's just, add 1 here, plus 1 here. So this is a part of the ongoing effect, where currently it's -3 power if your opponent has 4 cards here. The new version, which is live as you're listening to this, is the ongoing is now -4 power if your opponent has 4 cards here, bringing him from a 2/5 down to a 2/1. And they also went into the dev description saying that he's clearly the best 2-cost card out there, and there's not enough reason to not play him. This could give enough reason to not play him. And look at somebody else. What do you think?
It's definitely one of those things where for a while there, Lizard wasn't played as much in Series 1 and 2. You didn't play him as much in Series 1 and 2 because there's a lot of Zoo decks. And at that point, there's a lot of decks where it was just about filling up the board and making a big board. So Lizard hit his ongoing all the time. But once you reach that Series 3 and above, right, you start to get in these decks that don't fill up all spaces on the board. And so that's where Lizard really starts to shine. So again, just giving some background information for anybody listening that's kind of in Snap, but maybe not into the weeds with some of the in-game stuff. But towards the in-game stuff, that's what makes him so strong. 2/5, he's one of the best swings on a card that really doesn't have a downside unless they have all 4 cards there. So you steer away from like Mojo World. This one surprises me because it does kind of kill Lizard in my opinion. I know it's just 1 power.
Wow.
Going from a 2/2 to a 2/1. Now that doesn't mean, when I say kill, it doesn't mean people aren't going to play it. but I definitely feel like when he got the -3, it felt bad, but it didn't feel that bad. You still have a 2-2. It's fine. They had to waste filling up that lane. But now if you're going to take me to a 2-1, like,
yeah,
it just feels bad. I don't know if that 1 power mattered, but it matters in my heart.
I think there's another reason for this outside of the super high playability. And it means you rewind the podcast back about 10 minutes. I think it has to do with Stegron, because the synergy now between them actually goes way up, because now you're
can
baiting.
Punch one of them cards away.
Exactly. Yeah. You're baiting, hey, come and get me. I'm going to drop down to a 2-1. This brings value to Stegron, where he says, not today, as you said, on turn 6. And now that stays as a 5-drop. Think of a lane that has Lizard, Iron Man, Stegron, and Omega Red. That's a solid lane. That's an easy win, and you've moved power on the board. So I think that the Lizard piece has a little bit to do with the other Lizard. In my just personal opinion, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the history there, but that's just the way I'm looking at it, and I think it makes me want to get Stegron, but I don't want to spend the 6,000 tokens on it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we'll start to see too with the look forward, when we're looking at high evolutionary, right? We're going to expect to see more Luke Cages. And the good thing about this, if you don't know, if you've not played with Luke Cage means your cards cannot go down. So if you play Luke Cage with Lizard, it doesn't matter if they have all 4 cards on their board, still not going to go down. So that I think that's also probably a little preemptive of that as well. It's not directly correlated, but it's definitely one of those that this -4 may not even matter in a lot of decks.
Right.
So as you kind of look at that, in the future as well. Now here's the one thing I want to see. This goes out to the Snap's art department. When he goes down to a 2-1, can we please have an animation and a new art of Doc Connors instead of the Lizard being on the card? And it would make perfect sense. Like, he reverted back to Doc Connors, and that's why he's a 2-1. I think that would be that would make it all the best.
All of the art. I mean, that'd be cool. Let's be honest here. That'd be cool. But
I mean, it could be a generic Doc Connors art. Like, you don't have to have every variant of Doc Connors.
But you don't want a Dan Hip Doc Connors art? Like, come on.
I mean, I would love to have just like Skrull tokens and all of that. I would love to have all those. But if they can just give me just a regular Doc Connors, I mean, you know, just Doc Connors just flipping up.
Turns to nothing.
It'd be nice.
It'd be cool. Nice. All right. The big one that we all saw coming, pretty much exactly as we saw coming, as we called it, as everybody called it, which means that the devs are listening. They know exactly what we want. This is the one that we all called for. We cried for. We didn't have pitchforks. We didn't have, giant torches. We just said, hey guys, can you make Sandman a 5/3? And they did.
Yep.
Thank goodness. I mean, this is one of those cards where he's incredibly relevant right now, right? Mm-hmm. He's the biggest counter to the season pass hit monkey. And you're trying to climb. You get into turn 5, and all of a sudden, this guy shows up. And with 5 power on top of that,
he's too much on curve.
It was too restricting, for the amount of benefit that you get out of his ability. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly powerful. So they had to bring him down. And I'm hoping that in these last couple days of the season, that in turn, it will also reduce the amount of Sandman decks, please. Because people always, anytime there's a nerf for any reason, the deck goes away for like 3 days. Think of what happened to Shuri. The second the Shuri nerf happened also, they were gone. They tried them in the first 2 hours just to say they did.
Yeah.
And then they didn't touch it again, unless if it was a Nimrod deck. That's it. So I think the Sandman piece is also going to happen a little bit in the next couple of hours, that people will see it, try it, see if it makes a huge deal for them or not. But then either way, oh no, this card was nerfed, hands off. And I hope that happens, because it is one of the biggest roadblocks right now for so many people in the 80s and 90s at the moment. It's the nerf we needed. It's the nerf we wanted.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting to see, like in their notes, where they even say like they expected to see Sandman plus Doctor Doom. Like they
Yeah.
understood that by playing Sandman, now you need a card that can contest multiple lanes off of one card. So it is good on them for seeing that, knowing that that's interaction. They just didn't understand it would be this detrimental, especially like you mentioned, coming out the same time as Hitmonkey with a bounce deck. Thinking
Yeah.
about the fact that like when Kitty Pride comes back, everybody's gonna be mad when you get a free Kitty, but you can never play her because Sandman's on the board, right? So there's going to be some interactions and nuances with that. But yeah, is -2 power good enough? I don't know. I think it's the right first step.
You want it more?
I don't know what I want yet. I like you mentioned, I want to see what this feels like in the board. It's definitely one of those that being a 5/5, he was too much on curve. Like playing 5 power on turn 5, it's not the optimal thing you can do on turn 5, but it's not the worst thing you can do on turn 5. Like if you think of some of the biggest turn 5 cards, you're looking at Iron Man, which has to have a bunch of stuff around him. You're looking at Abomination being the most like big power, right? That you can put out without a negative downfall. So having it at a 5, he was still pretty good as a turn 5 alone. But the fact that you're really messing with their play style on turn 6 was too much. So I like the 5/3. We'll have to see if that actually does slow stuff down because it's still pretty good, especially if you're following it up with the Doom on the following turn. Against a lot of decks. A lot of decks are still going to struggle with that. And I'm glad that they targeted Sandman, because my worry and my concern was they were going to, just like they did with Shuri, and they targeted every card around her. And I get that that's a costed card, a token card compared to Sandman, but I'm glad that they didn't come in and say, let's go make Doom 4/4 bots instead of 5/5 just to see if that changes. Now, if it's still a problem, maybe that's the change they need to make, but hopefully this kind of is a good first step and we see a slight decline. I don't foresee this making a huge decline, but I could see this doing a slight decline.
Yeah, I don't think there's right now at least a need specifically to also touch on Doctor Doom, but I could see it. I could see them changing him also to a 6/3, for example, or a 6/4, and doing the same thing, but leaving the Doom bots at 5 power each. So now your placement does matter. I do think that could come to the future. I just don't see it necessary, nor do I think it's going to be needed in the next few weeks, because we're going to have a lot of shiny new cards come down the pipeline. There's going to be a lot of new style deck, building type pieces. And I don't think it's necessarily. I think there are other nerfs and other buffs that need to happen first before they need to re-examine with a small pool this change, because they're going to look at it. They're going to see how Sandman, goes over the next few weeks, and then say, okay, do we need to do it more? Do we need to tweak another card? Because now they have that ability to do that in these intermittent weeks. So remember, next week, there is no OTA. So this version is here for at least 2 weeks. So if they're going to change it again, the earliest they would change it would be after the Nebula release week, and it'll be the week after, that following Thursday, which, if I look at my calendar quickly, as I hit the wrong thing and just minimize and ruined my whole stream recording, it's the 11th. So it hopefully we'll be okay with this version. And I think there's enough here. There's enough here for us to say, good job.
Yeah.
And I'm very happy with all 4 of these.
And here's the thing. So you got one more, which is the Enchantress. And so as we look at kind of the answer to Sandman, right? We talked about this a little bit last week too. Like Sandman feels bad because you don't have a great answer to him. Like if he comes down on 5, it doesn't feel good playing Enchantress on turn 6. Still doesn't in this case, but they have boosted Enchantress from a 4/4 to a 4/6. If you think about it, Enchantress really fell out of favor a while back. She was pretty good in Series 2 and things like that, when you saw a lot of the Khazar decks where they were doing like Khazar, Blue Marvel, Onslaught. And you're just like, nah, here's a Enchantress, get rid of it. But even in that case, like Onslaught's a 7/7, like what you're throwing down there, even if you're taking away the buffs, it's still a pretty big lane. So for her to now go to a 4/6, it puts her on par with cards like White Queen, right? White Queen is probably the best 4-drop. That's just I need some power. I want to play it, and it's a good card, right? If you're not building a very specific deck and you have an open slot, she's a very easy, let's just put it in, because
she's a staple of the good card list. Like,
yes, she's a 4/6. You get to know what's in their hand as their top end, and you get a free card. Now, is she going to be as good as White Queen? Probably not. Probably not. But what are your thoughts? Taking her up to a 4/6, does this make her more playable?
It does. I think in a Zabu deck, it makes it a lot more playable for that turn 6 removal, if you will. That like, okay, let me do this now. Because now there's a decent power swing. At 4/4, I think those 2 points really do matter when you're trying to strip, an Iron Man, for example, or if you're trying to strip away a Darkhawk or etc. That extra little oomph of ongoing that you're trying to take away is really important. And I think she's way more justified at 4/6. I'm glad they gave her 6 and not 5. I think the 4/5 would just be saying, okay, cool. The 4/6 makes her stand out. And the whole dev description of saying, basically, guys, look at the meta right now. Everything is Patriot and Iron Man and Darkhawk and Devil Dino. You need a better counter card. Let me give you a better counter card. Here's 2 extra points on the more expensive of the 2, because yes, you can rogue and take it on, but if you just want to kill the whole lane, I mean, you might as well. And ta-da, here you go. So I think it's a well-needed change. I just did not see this one coming either. I didn't think that it was going to be touched or, focused on in this first wave of OTAs. But again, given their explanation, it makes a hell of a lot of sense, because it probably, it wasn't played as much, except for yesterday when we had the featured location of the sandbar, which, oh boy, sandbar was fun, but really restricting in regards to like, well, do I want to play into this or do I want to play around it and just not care? This is one you needed to play into, and there were 2 ways to go about it. And I'll show you the deck at the end of the podcast that I used, because this was a location, and I'm glad Enchantress was a part of it.
Absolutely.
I will say there's been a lot of changes, with these cards, and some of the meta, especially the Doomwave decks, like they're going to be tremendously impacted by all of this, right? So when that does happen, it's a matter of what's next. And how are we going to build these decks again? Are we going to change these decks up? Are we going to need to put in more power, start, tweaking this card, etc.? Given that these changes are going live, I think it is going to affect the end of the season. I do think it is going to affect this final week of people getting used to, this lizard change is going to be a very relevant one for currently. Sandman is a very relevant change for right now. The amount of enchantresses you're about to see come to the game because of trying to counteract Patriot is going to be huge. So within that new meta, over the next couple of days, as we get to the end of the season, I decided to take a look at, this is prior to the OTA conversations. I looked at them at 8 o'clock this morning, my time, and said, let's take a look at the decks that are actually doing well from both major sites. And what are it's a matter of not just what you're seeing, but also what is actually performing well, both with wins and with cubes. So I broke it down, and there were several huge surprises. So I pulled my statistics from both Untapped and Snap.fan. And when I look at the Snap.fan breakdown, here's what I did. And this is for both of them, actually. I looked at the decks that have been seen from collection level 3,000 and higher, pool 3+, so including everything all the way through pool 5, and ranks 80 to 90. I didn't do 70 to 99. I did 80 to 99. And the reason I did that is because I want to see those who are like closest getting there, who are probably putting in the most games right now. What are they running? So Doomwave is the #1 deck by a long shot. And when it comes to scene.
Yeah, the other thing I would kind of point out that's different for everybody listening to, the thing that's different this season is now we officially have this once you hit infinite, and it happened kind of halfway through the season, but once you hit infinite, you're not seeing those people again. So all these stats that we've looked at, you know, last season, season before, and things like that, like you had to take into account there was a lot of people that were still playing good decks when they were infinite. There was a lot of people playing ridiculous decks in infinite, giving away cubes, right? So now by looking at this data this season, next season, and so on, like there's not any giving away cubes anymore. So there may be bad players giving you cubes, but there's no like just, hey, I'm infinite, here's 8 cubes. So yeah, I just wanted to caveat that too, that it's very interesting to look at these decks. And I would love to see, and maybe I can reach out to Sank on this. I'd love to see what the decks look like week 1 compared to what the decks look like the last week, right? Like,
so these stats here are from the new patch. These are only from the new patch, not just the entire month. So since 14.7 dropped. So this should be only the non-infinite inclusions. Should be.
I'm just thinking in my head, like I wonder that first week where everybody, like a lot of
what it looked like,
right? They just jumped to infinite. Like what decks were they using compared to what we're using now, which right now, again, we're still skewed, right? We've got the Patriot.
Yeah, it's still definitely skewed because, you know, it's very clear. Everyone loves Doomwave. It has the highest scene rate on both sites. People are rocking Doomwave left and right. Snap.fan, the top 5 decks are Doomwave, Advanced Patriot, which is basically Patriot with Ultron and Super Skrull for the most part. In like over 40% of the decks, they had Super Skrull. Zabu Darkhawk was the 3rd deck. And all of those had about 11% scene rate and higher out of the whole mix. 10% goes to Death Galactus. Obviously, if you're seeing Galactus, there's a very obvious reason. It is a very prominent deck. All of them are all within 3% each of how much is being seen, which means between these 4 decks alone, they make up 40% of what you see. Doomwave, Patriot, Zabu Darkhawk, and Death Galactus. Now, the other thing with this too is this is not including all versions of Patriot at that. That might shoot it up even more. This is not including the Khazar version of Patriot. This is not including the generic version of Patriot, which also have their own stats. This is just the advanced, super intense version, which takes a lot more very specific cards. And then the last deck, which is a huge drop off in number 5. It goes from number 4 was seeing 9.89% of the time to Hitmonkey Sarah seeing a whopping 3.51% of the time. So Doomwave, Advanced Patriot, Zabu Darkhawk, Death Galactus, and Hitmonkey Sarah make up your top 5 over at Snap.fan. The other top 5 is Doomwave, shocker. Galactus, shocker. Patriot, shocker. Darkhawk, shocker. And once again, between the 4 of those, that's 40% of the build. So that's very obviously clear that this is what people are playing. It's these 4 decks, and you got to be prepared to face all 4 of these decks. The other one that was on the Untapped site was Junk. So basically clog decks. Those are very relevant and fun. I was surprised at that, not going to lie. But then seeing other statistics later on, it made a hell of a lot of sense.
I'm surprised on the discrepancy with the Galactus between both sites. Now, again, we're talking about 2 different trackers, who's using what tracker and things like that.
Right, of course.
7% difference is a pretty high percentage of a difference between the
Unfortunately,
two sides,
you're misreading that. So the Galactus deck is on Untapped is seen 12.3% of the time. And then on Snap.fan, it's being seen 9.89% of the time. So it's just about 3% difference.
Oh, I thought that said 17. I got you.
It's okay. It's okay.
That's my bad old age eyes over here.
You're getting old. This is why people enjoy you on podcasts, because they don't have to see you struggle and squint as you're looking at all of the information.
Very, very true.
It's okay. I'll keep reading for you, and then I'll get you new glasses for Christmas. But let's take a look at win rate and cube rate, because there's constantly an argument about what's more important. So I'll talk about both. When looking at Untapped in win rate, the top 5 decks were number 1. Thanos Lockjaw has the highest percent on win rate. And again, this is post the patch exclusively. It's still the highest win rate. Second highest is Darkhawk. Third highest was Discard, which, again, incredibly shocking. Patriot was fourth, and then Lockjaw, just regular Lockjaw, as well as the Zabu Dino decks, tied for fifth. Over on Snap.fan, the numbers are even more interesting. Where the number one win rate deck, which is what I played today to climb a little higher back up in the 90s, is Master Mold Ronan with a 55.67% win rate. It's not seen very often, but when you are playing it, it's doing incredibly well. Followed by generic Patriot, Spider-Man decks, not the Galactus style ones. It's the Spider-Man Doomwave deck. Thanos Spectrum, so ongoing Thanos decks. And lastly, Daredevil Dino, which is always going to be a good, solid, well-rounded deck. Both have very different lists, but seeing Discard and Ronan in either of them was incredibly shocking to me.
Yeah, it's the interesting thing about it is, like, when we think of how the stats are tracked, it's based on a tracker being on someone that's playing, plus it does monitor what they're playing against, right? So it is always curious of what subset of players are doing. And the only reason I say that is you look at something like the Master Mold deck. It started to make a resurgence because of the tournament the other day, and I can't remember who it is, but somebody put out a video about how good the deck is, how good Master Mold is, and how it's going to be this huge meta changer once everybody has it, right? And then on top of that with Ronan and stuff. So again, so that's always going to like tip the scales on a deck or not, because everybody sees them, they want to play, they play it or whatever. But it is surprising that it's so high of a win rate, and I'm curious if it's just because people don't know how to play against it, because there's not a bunch of Master Molds out there, so then they get like flustered when they start getting signals in their hand that they don't want in their hand. They don't know how to play their deck or something. But I don't know. I mean, I love to see this though. I love to see that there's a lot of decks on here that you just wouldn't expect, because they're not in that top, right? They're not in the top 5 decks played, but they're better decks. They're winning decks.
Yeah, 100%. And the same thing happened with Cube Rate in both sites too. On Snap.fan, the top 5 decks in Cube Rate were Bast Serotonin, so your Sarah Bast, very often negative decks, which are, when they do win, they win big.
Oh yeah.
Type decks. Second to that, Master Mold Ronan. So number 1 in win rate and number 2 in cube rate. So I think Master Mold Ronan needs to be looked at a little bit more intently by the community, because I think there's a lot there that a lot of people are not playing into. Yeah. And I think that gives our Enchantress even more love, to be honest. The 3, 4, and 5 in that cube rate for Snap.fan are Invisahella, which we're seeing a lot more recently. These discard, let me hide Invisible Woman, and then ta-da! Everything appears back on the field. That's making a huge comeback and still very successful, just like the Bass Sarah deck, the Sarah Hit Monkey deck. When it wins, it wins big. Odin on reveal too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
When I think that's because of the Sandman, right? So like if you think about like what Sandman's doing, Hella decks don't need to play multiple cards. It's, essentially all you need is 3 cards. You just throw down Invisible Woman, then you throw down MODOK, then you throw down Hella behind her, and then bam, you've got an entire board of giant drops. So so it is interesting because of Sandman. Decks like that, went out of style a long time ago because it was so much interruption, and like even a good Hella doesn't always do what you want it to do against like a giant Shuri deck, right? But like, now it's interesting to see the comeback because of the rise of Sandman.
100%. Odin on reveal was tied with Hit Monkey Sarah as well for the other 2 that round out the top 5 from Snap.fan. Over on Untapped, the top 5 in cube rate is kind of clogged because there were a lot of ties. But the number 1 is Sarah Control, which is still, what makes them say that this is the top deck in the game, basically, right now, is that style of deck. Followed by Sarah Surfer and Doomwave, which is why I think we're also seeing a very high pitch in Doomwave personally. Followed by discard. There it is again. Discard, Darkhawk, and Lockjaw. All are tied for third place. And then you've got Zabu Dino and Patriot to help round out the top 4. And number 5 makes me very happy to say Jeff the Baby Landshark, rounding out the top 5 with Untapped. And I think that just makes me smile because he's just a fun card and everybody's figuring out fun, awesome, cool ways to use it. I know I did. And I absolutely love Jeff the Baby Landshark. So to see him in the top 5 in cube rate, you know what? That's awesome. But it's not the highlight story of this. Let's be honest here. Right.
Yeah, as long as you know how to use them. I literally had someone this morning throw them into, and gosh, I need to look up some locations. Bar Sinister makes the 4 copies of a card, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so threw him into Bar Sinister, got 4 Jeff the Baby Landsharks. Proceeded over the next 2 or 3 turns to move them to Fist Tower. Now they weren't playing death, so I don't know what they were doing, but they were slowly killing Jeff in front of my eyes every turn.
They were poaching. Just straight up poaching. That's harpooning them.
I took the 8 cubes. Maybe it was a bot. I don't know, but I was like,
that's amazing though. If it was a bot, that's the most entertaining bot I've heard of in Marvel Snap.
He really wanted Fist Tower, and somehow he thought Jeff was going to
go look at your matches on snap.fan and find out who that was so you can see, like, just research it, double check. If so, we need to contact you because you're awesome. Just throwing that out there. The overall big thing that I want to take from this after looking at both of these lists is the fact that we're seeing discard, we're seeing Master Mold / Ronan having great numbers and not being talked about or played enough. Junk decks, which is technically a Master Mold style deck as well, is in the top 5 in Untapped when it comes to how often it's being seen, but it's still only being seen less than 5% of the time. Everyone is running to 4 decks right now. They're running to Doomwave, they're running to Patriot, they're running to Galactus, and then they're running to Darkhawk. If you're running one of those 4 decks, you are in the meta. If you're running anything that helps to counter them, you're probably playing smarter, because that needs to be the way that you climb, in my opinion, is how do I go around those 4 decks? What deck is going to be prepared to take on 2, maybe 3 of those decks easily? And as I look at all of those numbers, maybe the answer is Master Mold. Maybe it is discard. You know, I have a lot of playing to do this weekend.
Yeah. And again, even the junk decks are good if you think of Galactus in general. Like a Debris stops Galactus pretty easy.
And a Snap.
Yeah. So it's definitely one of those that there's a lot of cards out there that can do that. But to your point, I mean, that's what your meta is. That's what we see, you know, people complaining. There's a big talk going on right now of, is Galactus too much? Does he need to be changed and things like that? So I'm interested to see what everybody's going to say when they look at this top meta and they start to say it's this card or it's that card. We just saw a tweak on Sandman, right? We're looking at some of these other decks. What's going to happen there? We've seen the Enchantress get pumped up now. So those Darkhawk decks, hey, you're done. Those Ronan decks, because that's what you're doing with the Master Mold. It's Ronan, it's Darkhawk, it's Dino, it's these decks. And now Enchantress may be that new answer because she's a 4/6, not a 4/4 anymore.
Very true. Very, very true. Maybe that is the answer. Maybe it does lie, you know, within her. We shall see.
But I know you've got a deck that you've been playing that you like, that is an answer to a couple of these decks in the way that you're playing.
This is true.
What are your thoughts there, man?
So when it comes to, you know, the deck I want to highlight, I wish I could say it was mine. It is not. It comes from D Money, and I played this deck on Tuesday, and it's aptly called F Patriot, and it was meant for Sandbar, right? Because everybody and their sister was playing Patriot. The smart people, or those who had access, were playing the Sauron decks, and the really cheeky people were playing move decks. But for the most part, the most accessible one that people were playing into was they were playing Patriot. And this deck is straight up designed to counter, like hard counter Patriot. It's the Hood, Daredevil, Zabu, Jeff the Baby Landshark, Rogue, Killmonger, Shang-Chi, Spider-Man, Enchantress, Professor X, Doc Octopus, and Hulk. Now, today, looking at this deck, I would still make 1 or 2 changes on it. But on the sandbar, you know, it was great to have Hulk in there as that extra turn 6 wha-bam drop that you could do. But the whole deck is based on, let me capitalize on messing with your ongoings, as you could do with Enchantress and Rogue. You can go ahead and put down that Daredevil so you know where you can Professor X and lock down a lane so it's exclusively yours. And even if it isn't fully yours, you could Jeff the Baby Landshark into it, which can also be replaced probably with a Polaris if I had to give any suggestion, because you're trying to mess with somebody else's deck. The Hood I might even take out now because I don't necessarily need that space to get a demon to play into the sandbar. I could probably swap that out with another, you know, Iceman, because Iceman is just fantastic. Spider-Man blocks him off again, so you could do Spider-Man into Professor X, and then Doc Ock says, "Here, let me." Yeah, you could also Nova it too, because you got the Killmonger in there. And then we just mess with everybody when you pull out that Doc Ock and you know it's a Patriot deck, and they're very aptly waiting to play Patriot into their Mystique, and you mess with their order because it pulls one and not the other, or pulls, you know, them in the wrong order, which is even more entertaining. Like, you have a lot of outs on how to mess with Patriot, and knowing that you're going to see Patriot decks at least 1 in every 10 games, you're helping yourself tremendously with this style of deck, and it was very relevant in the sandbar. Now, in regards to all of the other decks that are out there, you know, the Professor X lane is surprisingly fun when you can drop that down onto a Sandman lane, because very often they're trying to Sandman. If they get it out early, they're trying to play on top of Sandman and then spread everything else out wider. So you'll lock out that ability for an Odin replay. I thoroughly enjoyed that. The Doc Ock play, knowing that you can then just Shang-Chi afterwards and get rid of some big cards, is always a huge 5 into 6 play. It gives you just so much telegraphed future to know this is what I want to do and this is what I'm going to do instead. The original version of this played Ghost instead of the Hood, and I just, Ghost I don't have, so I went with one that made sense. But at the same time, I still don't think Ghost is really needed in almost any deck. So you could put any other 1-drop, in my opinion, into this deck, and it would be absolutely fantastic. It was fun, it was different, and it was messing with the opponent in an appropriate way without being like, hey, look, I'm Galactus. You know, like, it was good. Really fun deck. What do you think of this deck?
No, I like it. I think that you've got some surprise cards that haven't been around for a while. I'll stick with Rogue first. So last night we had fun over on the Snap.fan Twitch channel, and we were doing our kind of Wednesday night snap that we're going to be doing weekly. And so I just was participating last night playing, and literally lost my round 3, the final game, because I forgot they had Rogue in their deck, and Rogue took my my power there. So it's definitely one of those things where I think Rogue is an undervalued card. It's funny that they have Rogue and Enchantress, but at the same time, we saw that meta, Patriot everywhere. Plus, even with the Darkhawk decks, being able to do it on 2 lanes, because you know that they're going to Darkhawk 1 lane, they're going to Mystique another lane, they're going to, you know, Dino 1 lane and then Darkhawk another. Having the ability to do it on 2 lanes is pretty huge. So I like it. The one card which we were talking about earlier when you were showing, or when you were talking about this morning, I mean, the one card that sticks out to me is, I'm not a huge Dr. Octopus fan. Yes, he can really mess up people, and I definitely see it in the Patriot deck messing them up, because if you pull out their Ultron early, or you pull a Mystique that misses, like, there's definitely some play in there. And with Shang-Chi, I guess you got your backup in case you pull down their death plus, you know, She-Hulk, whatever that's there. But I like it. I mean, you got a lot of good combos in there, a lot of stuff that works well together.
I will say, you know, it is incredibly fun and redeeming to know you're going up against a Galactus deck, and then you Doc Ock the Galactus deck on turn 5 also. And just completely pull out their null, death, all of this, and then Galactus goes off, boom, and all of your power is gone going into the final turns. Like, it is incredibly rewarding. I absolutely Loved that.
Well, and if you can, like for the Galactus matchup specifically, if you can predict that, and maybe you don't have Doc Ock in your hand, if you can predict that they're going to Galactus and where they're going to Galactus, and you give them priority, to your point, you have Rogue and Enchantress. So if they're going to null, I mean, you get to steal it, right? Like, of course, they've also had the ability of having death and things like that. But yeah, I like it. I like it in general. There's a lot of good synergies, like we said. Daredevil plus Professor X, Zabu plus 2 of your 4 drops on turn 6. I mean, you can't really go wrong there.
It's a really, really fun deck. So D-Money, thank you so much for, bringing this to the community. It was a lot of fun to play, and it might be worth revisiting in the next few days as we climb back up and try to hit infinite before the end of the day on Monday, because we got to get ready for Nebula, baby. We got to get ready. I think I've already theory crafted some decks. I've made a YouTube video that will be out over the weekend in regards to it. I think there's going to be some really fun things happening next season. So a couple more days, climb like hell. Do your best, everybody. Get ready for it. You've got some more information now today that you didn't have yesterday about what you're really going to be going up against. And it's probably, you got a 40% chance it's one of 4 decks. Probably even more than that. And that's because that's not including those who don't track. So really good conversation today, Default Dan. As always, ladies and gentlemen, you can find us everywhere. You can find us on Twitch. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Discord. You can find us right here on the Snap Back podcast, where you snap and we snap back. Default Dan, thank you so much for joining me. This is your big moment. Say goodbye, Default Dan.
We'll see you guys later.
That was genuine.
Better.
That was good.
Better.
It is. See,
Better.
it's like you care.
We'll get a tagline at some point.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried selling you them. You're just not buying.
I know.
So,
I mean,
cool, man.
on the stream, it's y'all take it easy, but
on stream, it's y'all take it easy. Here, it's see you later. I'm never gonna let you.
See you later, guys.